Get your black ass out of this room. Silence cracked, and then snapped. Heads turned, conversations died, and somewhere across the VIP lounge, a waiter nearly dropped a glass of champagne. Stephen Parkhurst didn't whisper. He wanted everyone to hear it. The guests, the dealers, the big boss. The black man standing at the center of the lounge, surrounded by golden chandeliers, baccarat crystal, and judgment sharp enough to slice through velvet rope. Marcus didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there, charcoal suit tailored like armor, collar open, no logo, no watch flashing on purpose. Just a glimpse of platinum at the wrist when he slid his hand casually into his pocket. A Vacheron Constantin, for those who knew what to look for. A few guests did. Their eyes widened and narrowed. Stephen stepped forward, emboldened. You're not on the list. And I don't care how much cologne you spray or what car dropped you off, this space isn't for you. Someone near the bar smirked, probably wandered in from the slots. Another voice, older, meaner. These people always push boundaries. Laughter, a low ripple, then the unmistakable click of a phone camera starting to record. Marcus stood still. He looked at no one, and yet everyone felt seen. The lounge reeked of control, polished walnut, imported cigars, smooth jazz humming beneath tension. This wasn't just luxury, it was legacy wealth. A room built not to keep people in, but to keep him out. He had seen this before. This exact choreography. The hush, the quiet cruelty, the expectation that he'd shrink, apologize, disappear. Not tonight. Stephen leaned closer, whispering now but louder in hatred. You don't belong here. You never will. Marcus tilted his head, just slightly. His gaze rose to meet Stephen's, and he said nothing. But in that one look something shifted. The bartender stopped pouring. The music hiccuped. Even the croupier at the high-stakes table paused mid-shuffle. Stephen blinked, just once. The guards flanking the back wall exchanged glances, unsure, unbriefed, suddenly hesitant. Marcus took one step forward. One, and the entire room stopped breathing. That's when the fear began to spread, not loud, but deep and irreversible. Because when a man like Marcus says nothing, that silence doesn't mean surrender. It means something's coming. Have you ever entered a room so polished, so quiet, and still felt like it was screaming at you to leave? What would you do if the whole room already decided who you were? No one said a word. Marcus didn't need them to. He just stood there still, measured, a living contradiction to every stereotype rippling through the room. That one step forward hadn't just moved his body. It had shifted gravity. Stephen's throat moved, swallowed something dry. The pit boss glanced toward the security team, then looked away. The two guards blank-faced. Corporate Train had taken a half step forward earlier. Now they didn't know what to do. Someone near the back lowered their phone, and that's when she spoke. A voice, small, female, soft, but cutting clean through the quiet like a violin across glass. Stephen, you might want to look again. It was Elena Moreno, floor supervisor, young, Latina, overshadowed most nights by older white men in custom suits who forgot her name. But tonight, her voice had weight. Stephen snapped toward her. Excuse me? She didn't flinch. Her badge glinted under the downlight. He's not on your list, but he's on mine. Marcus didn't turn toward her, but something behind his eyes flickered, just for a breath. Stephen barked a hollow laugh. Oh, please. Since when do we take orders from interns? Elena's tone sharpened. Since that intern runs the sponsorship ledger. And since the man you're embarrassing is the reason the annual poker gala still has a $10 million prize pool. A silence. Not empty. Loaded. Someone gasped near the champagne cart. Stephen stared. You're joking. But Elena was already pulling out her phone. One swipe, one tap. On screen, a sponsorship contract. Logo, Cole Ventures Global. Signature, Marcus Elijah Cole. Title, Executive Chairman. Stephen went pale. Marcus still hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. Stephen took one long look at the document, then at Marcus, then at the crowd watching everything now. With open mouths, Elena looked down at her phone. If you'd like me to forward this to upper management, I'd be happy to. Steven stumbled backward a half step. I didn't know. Marcus's voice, when it came, was soft, colder than the champagne. You didn't want to know. And that line? That's when someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." Phones rose again. This time, not to humiliate but to remember. Steven tried to recover. Let's all calm down. We can sort this out in the back. But the back was already watching. Every corner of the room was tuned to Marcus now. He turned, slowly, to Elena. Their eyes met, and he nodded once. Not for thanks, for memory. He remembered people who spoke up, especially when no one else would, especially when it wasn't safe. But Steven wasn't done yet, not even close. Because people like him, they didn't fear being wrong. They feared losing control. Have you ever watched someone fall apart not from punches, not from screams, but from silence? Why do you think silence scares people more than rage? Steven straightened his spine, like posture could fix humiliation. I didn't mean any disrespect, he said, loud enough for the room to harbor. His eyes flicked toward the cameras. Too late. The narrative had left his mouth hours ago. Marcus didn't respond. He stood in that same position, half shadowed by chandelier light, his expression unreadable. But something about the way he slowly adjusted the cuff of his sleeve reveling. More of the platinum timepiece made it clear. This wasn't over. A man in a blue suit near the baccarat table whispered, "He's the CEO. That CEO." Another voice, sharper, followed. "How do you screw up this bad?" Steven tried again. "Mr. Cole, if there's been a misunderstanding." Marcus's eyes flicked toward him, not hostile, just final. And then he turned away. One slow step, then another, walking deeper into the room, not out of it, like he owned it. Because he did. Steven's voice cracked. "This is still a secure area. Yo, I can't just..." Elena stepped forward. "Steven, stop." He turned on her. "Don't tell me how to do my job." "Then do it better," she snapped, louder than before. Murmurs flared. Phones rose. And now, the staff at the far end of the room, dealers, servers. Hosts were no longer pretending not to watch. Steven's fingers clenched. He looked at the guards still standing there, statues in suits. But they didn't move. One of them, the taller one, glanced down at his earpiece, then slowly deliberate tilts back. Steven saw it, and he saw the crowd see it. That's when the panic hit. He stormed forward. "Fine. You want to pretend he's someone. You want to believe all this." He pointed at Marcus, who had now stopped at the far end of the lounge, hand resting on the polished edge of the grand piano. "He's just another entitled jerk with a suit and a card. Anyone can fake a company name. Anyone can throw money around and act like it matters." Marcus turned slightly, only slightly, and for the first time that night, he opened his mouth. 3 words, clear, calm, irrefutable. "Check your inbox." Steven's face twisted. "What?" Ding. A sound from his phone. One notification, subject line. "Urgent, CEO access authorization Cole Ventures Global." From General Manager, Vegas Division. Steven's hands trembled as he opened it. His eyes scanned, stopped. Read it again, and again. When he finally looked up, the color had drained from his face. Marcus turned back toward the piano, ran one slow hand across the keys. The action didn't make a sound, but it echoed louder than Steven's breath. That was when people started recording again. But this time, it wasn't humiliation they wanted to capture. It was elegance. A man who never raised his voice, never begged, never explained. And still, the room had turned. "Before I tell you what she revealed in front of the entire restaurant, I know you might be busy. Maybe you've got errands to run. Or maybe your mind can only handle so much drama at once. But if stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss how it all unfolds." Have you ever seen someone lose everything not from a mistake, but from being watched closely? Too late. What happens when power shifts in silence? The grand piano gleamed like obsidian beneath Marcus's fingers. He didn't press a key. He didn't need to. Just the sight of him standing there, poised yet completely in control, was enough to send a chill across the carpeted luxury. His reflection in the glossy lid shimmered beneath chandelier light, blurred but unbroken. The crowd held their collective breath. Stephen hadn't moved. He stood frozen, phone still lit in his hand, as if some unseen force had pinned him to the floor. His authority, his posture, his voice all absent now. Only embarrassment remained. And then, a small, unsure voice from near the drinks cart. "Marcus." It wasn't loud, but in the silence, it rang clear. Marcus turned slowly. A woman in her early 50s stepped forward from the crowd. Platinum scarf, crisp cream blazer. Elegant, understated. Her eyes were wide not with fear, but something stranger. Recognition. "You're Marcus Elijah Cole," she said, voice quivering. "Your mother was Rosalind Cole. She used to work housekeeping at the Bellagio." Marcus's jaw twitched. A breath caught in his throat. She kept going. "I had trained her. God, that was over 20 years ago. You were the little boy who sat in the break room with a library book bigger than your head." Someone chuckled nervously, but Marcus didn't smile. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Just enough." "I remember you," he said, voice softer than ever that night. The crowd shifted. Suddenly, he wasn't just the man with power. He was the child they'd never seen grow up, the one they overlooked, the one who never left. Stephen, in the corner, muttered under his breath, "You've got to be kidding me." Marcus turned back toward the piano. "Do you play?" the woman asked, tentatively. Marcus stared at the keys. "I used to." Silence. Then he sat down. Not to perform, not to impress, but because it was his. The bench didn't creak. His fingers hovered above the keys. No one dared speak. Even the cocktail shaker paused mid-rattle behind the bar. He tapped one note, middle C, soft, barely audible. It echoed more than it should have. Then another. A third. Not music, just tones. Spaced wide. Measured. People leaned in. The room didn't just listen, it submitted. And then he stopped. No final chord, no flourish. Just silence again. "Heroes," straightened his jacket, and looked out across the crowd, his crowd now. That's when Elena stepped forward again. But this time, not to defend. This time to deliver. Elena stepped forward, but not like before. This time, it wasn't to mediate. It wasn't to rescue. It was personal. The quiet in the lounge thickened as she crossed the velvet carpet, her heels barely making a sound against the luxury. The kind of silence that made even time seem hesitant. She didn't look at Stephen. She looked only at Marcus. And Marcus watched her now, not with the cool distance he'd held all night, but with something closer to uncertainty. The crowd noticed. Something shifted in the way Elena held herself, like someone who'd been carrying a secret too long. And suddenly, in the grandest room of one of the world's wealthiest casinos, she was no longer invisible. She stopped just beside the piano, looked down, then back up. "You probably don't remember," she said quietly. "You were maybe 12. A pause. In the back hallway of the Bellagio, your mom was in tears. A manager had just screamed at her in front of everyone. Marcus's eyes darkened, not with rage but memory. "I went to speak up," Elena continued. "I didn't. I just stood there." Her voice cracked. "You came up to me afterward, in your oversized hoodie, and you said, 'You don't have to fight for her. Just don't pretend it didn't happen.'" The room held its breath. Marcus didn't move, but his stare, it landed deep. Elena looked around the room now, voice louder, steadier. "I've spent 20 years working in this industry, and I've seen what happens when people with money decide who belongs." She turned back to Marcus. "You didn't just build a company, you built a mirror." Crowd reactions were now in full tilt. Some murmured, others whispered names: Marcus Cole, Cole Ventures, Rosalind's son. Stephen, meanwhile, looked like a man drowning in a room with no water. He tried to interject. "Look, this is all very touching, but it doesn't excuse." Elena turned to him, and for the first time, her words cut. "You screamed at the son of the woman who once cleaned your casino's floors. You mocked him for being where he already belonged. Then she looked to the crowd. How many of us are here because we earned it and how many are just lucky? No one questioned them at the door. Silence. The kind that leaves bruises. Stephen's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Marcus took one step forward, then another. He reached into the inner lining of his jacket and pulled something out. Not a phone, not a card, a letter. He handed it to Elena. She read silently, then nodded. Her voice was calm, effective immediately. Marcus Elijah Cole has assumed executive control of this casino's operational oversight. Per the clause in the Q3 sponsorship agreement, all access, staffing, and PR decisions now fall under his direct review. Gasps. Phones were up again. Stephen backed away like the room itself had turned on him. And maybe it had, but Marcus wasn't finished. There was one more thing he needed to say, not to Stephen, to everyone. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The letter still rested in Elena's hand like a judge's verdict. But Marcus didn't look at her anymore. He looked at the room, the VIPs, the waiters, the guards. Even the chandelier above seemed to hang lower now, as if listening. Marcus let the silence stretch. Then he spoke. One of the first things I learned, he said, was that power doesn't walk into a room shouting. He turned toward Stephen. It waits. He paused, let the words land. Then it listens. He scanned the faces around him, some guilty, some humbled, some simply curious. And then, when the room gets quiet enough, it decides. He took 2 more steps forward. You thought tonight was about rules, he said, about who's on the list, and who gets to stand behind the row. You thought saying no to me proves something. He stopped, not just his body, the air around him. You were wrong. He lifted the letter from Elena's hand and held it in plain view. This document gives me the power to replace your security, your management team, and your marketing division. It lets me remove entire departments, not because I'm angry, but because you built a system that confuses order with exclusion. The crowd was still. No breath, no cough, no movement. He let the silence thicken, then. But I'm not here to punish anyone. Whispers flickered. Stephen looked up, stunned, as if this wasn't the script he expected. I'm here to redesign the room. Now it was confusion that rippled through the crowd. Marcus continued, eyes forward, calm, measured. There will be mandatory training for all guest-facing staff. Not some video course you sleep through, but real-world immersion, real consequences. He looked at Elena. You'll lead it. Elena blinked, but nodded. Stephen stepped forward weakly. You're saying you're not firing me? Marcus didn't look at him. I'm saying you're going to learn why you thought you could say that to me and get away with it. A few guests gasped. One man near the back clapped once, then quickly stopped, unsure if it was allowed. But Marcus didn't need applause. He needed clarity. I'm not here to be the exception to your bias, he said. I'm here to make sure the next black man who walks through those doors isn't treated like a threat, just because he doesn't come with a name tag or a white face. He let the weight settle. Every phone was up, every live stream running, every whisper now loaded with realization. Marcus stepped back, adjusted his cuff, took one final look at the lounge. I didn't come here to remind you who I am, he said. I came to remind you who you become. And that is when the crowd finally understood. This wasn't revenge. It was reform. And reform doesn't ask for applause. It demands silence so the system can hear itself crack. Marcus didn't wait for a reply. He turned from the center of the room, calm as ever, and walked toward the exit. No security escort, no entourage, just the echo of his shoes across carpet designed to muffle consequences. As he passed, the velvet ropes seemed to part by themselves. People stepped aside without knowing why, heads lowered not from fear, but from something far heavier. Awareness. Elena followed 2 steps behind, holding the letter in one hand and something invisible in the other. Authority. True. Earned. Unexpected. The door to the lounge hissed open as Marcus exited. And then, he was gone. No applause, no words, just absence. And that's when the room began to thaw. Guests looked at one another. A man in a white blazer cleared his throat. Was that the guy from Forbes? Another replied, he owns the entire tournament circuit, Cole Ventures. They sponsor half the events on this floor. Someone else, I think he owns stock in the casino group, like a lot. The whispers turned inward, not about Marcus anymore, but about themselves. Near the back, a woman slowly slipped off her diamond-studded mask and whispered, I laughed. I didn't even realize I was laughing until he stared back. The bartender cleaned an already clean glass, avoiding the mirror behind him. The dealer at the high-stakes table adjusted his tie, fingers trembling. Stephen still stood frozen in the same spot, but this time, he wasn't being ignored. He was being watched. Two employees approached mid-level managers. One whispered, you should probably go home. I didn't mean, he started. No one's asking if you meant it, the other interrupted. They're asking if you've learned anything. Stephen looked toward the door Marcus had exited through, but it was closed now, and what was on the other side was no longer waiting for permission. Elena stood quietly near the piano, hands folded, phone still buzzing with messages from upstairs. She didn't move to fix anything. She didn't need to. The correction had already begun. A server approached her cautiously. Young, black, nervous. I've worked here 2 years, he said. Tonight was the first time I saw someone say what I've been thinking since day one. Elena met his eyes. You're not alone anymore. What Marcus did that night wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It didn't even look like victory. But in rooms like that, where silence had always been the most dangerous weapon, Marcus made silence obey him. And the system? It was already listening. 2 days later, the casino's internal memo went out at 6:03 a.m. Subject: Immediate Compliance and Culture Review VIP Division. Attached: a new organizational chart, temporary leadership appointments, and a message signed not by the general manager but by Marcus Elijah Cole. The top line was simple. Silence is no longer a neutral stance. Down the hall from the executive offices, Stephen sat alone in a small training room once used for vendor demos. The lights overhead flickered slightly, like even the ceiling wasn't sure if he belonged there anymore. No suit today, no name badge, just a plain polo shirt and the silence of his own thoughts. Across from him sat a diversity training consultant flown in overnight from Atlanta. The session wasn't a slideshow. It wasn't a video. It was a case study. His case. Clips from that night, crowd footage, transcripts of his words. Each time his voice echoed from the screen, get your black ass out of this room. He flinched. The consultant paused playback. How do you think that sounded to the people who weren't holding the power? Stephen said nothing. Silence stretched again, but this time, it wasn't Marcus controlling it. It was consequence. Meanwhile, on the mezzanine above the main gaming floor, Elena stood beside a team of compliance officers and operations staff. Her nameplate was temporary, printed on cardstock, and slipped into a brushed gold frame. Interim Director Guest Experience and Equity Oversight. It didn't matter that it wasn't engraved. It mattered that it was there. Below her, in the lounge that had once hushed her voice, tables were being rearranged. Not just for aesthetics. The velvet rope had been removed, replaced with trained hosts who asked not for attire or last names but for intention. We want to be hospitable, Elena told the team, not hierarchical. Someone joked quietly about losing the exclusivity. Elena turned to him. Then you've confused elegance with elitism. No one laughed. At the back of the room, the young server from before Jan was now shadowing the new guest relations lead. He held a tablet, spoke clearly, smiled easily, and looked like someone who finally knew his name would be remembered for the right reasons. Marcus hadn't returned. He didn't need to. His message had arrived before he even opened his mouth. What lingered now wasn't just his presence. It was the mirror he left behind. Staff whispered his name less out of awe and more out of awareness. Clients asked about him not to request favors, but to understand who he was. And behind closed doors, other Casanos of their industry swear already circulating the clip. Not just as a PR warning, but as a blueprint. Marcus didn't break the system that night. He made it look at itself without blinking. And sometimes that's all it takes. The news didn't break with headlines. It unfolded like a quiet revolution. At 8:17 a.m., Cole Ventures Global updated the footer of their website. Just one line. Entry without permission, a leadership initiative for the overlooked. No press release, no flashy ad campaign. But inside the industry, the ripple hit instantly. Banks, hospitality groups, even rival casino chains forwarded the link across their boards. The initiative was simple. Select 10 individuals per sector. No resumes, no pedigree. Just overlooked staff nominated by peers. Then, 12 months of immersive leadership training, full salary. Direct mentorship from Cole Ventures executives. And one clause written in bold. We don't want who looks ready. We want who's already watching. At the center of it all, Elena sat in a quiet office overlooking the strip. A message still open on her screen. From Marcus E. Cole. Subject, consider this. The body was only 4 lines long. You didn't just speak. You witnessed. Come build this with me. One room at a time. No salary mentioned. No title. Just coordinates for a private meeting 2 days later in Chicago. She stared at it. Not because she didn't know her answer, but because she knew what it would cost. Her new office, the one she'd earned not by climbing, but by standing still when it mattered, was starting to feel permanent. The staff respected her. The system was bending, slowly, under her voice. But outside this room was the world Marcus was building. The world that didn't need velvet ropes at all. She closed the laptop gently. Didn't respond. Not yet. Some rooms take longer to leave even when you've unlocked the door. Downstairs, Jaden helped a guest who didn't speak much English find a game she could afford. He smiled, listened, walked her over. No one stopped her at the entrance. No one looked her up and down. She didn't know who Marcus Cole was, but she didn't need to. She just knew the room felt different now. Not safer, just less suspicious of her existence. In a different state. A hospital administrator who had watched the viral clip over breakfast paused halfway through his hiring meeting. Wait, he said. Why haven't we promoted Rosa? She's run that floor better than the last 3 supervisors. In Detroit, a logistics firm reprinted their core values. The new first line, we hire by insight, not eyesight. And in a private room at the Bellagio, the same hotel where a black boy once waited in the break room. While his mother folded towels, a guest relations manager clicked apply on the entry without permission site. She hesitated when asked to nominate someone else. Then typed one name, James Overnight Valet. Quiet, fast, smarter than all of us. And submitted. Marcus never returned to the casino. Not because he couldn't, but because he didn't need to. His shadow had already taught the room how to adjust its own light. And that is how power moves when it no longer needs permission to enter. Not with noise, but with naming. Not with shouting, but by staring down silence. Until silence breaks first. The cafe was unmarked. No logos, no valet. Just an old brick building tucked between a law firm and a dry cleaner in downtown Chicago. Elena checked the address again, then stepped inside. Marcus was already there. Corner table, dark gray sweater. No entourage. A paperback beside his coffee, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Pages folded, no bookmark. He looked up, nodded once. Thanks for coming, he said simply. She sat down, let the silence land first. You don't do offices, she asked. Marcus smirked faintly. Offices come with scripts. I prefer clarity. She glanced at the book, reading for pleasure. For memory, he said. We forget too easily where invisibility begins. A pause. Then she asked a question that had been with her since the email. Why me? Marcus didn't answer immediately. He sipped his coffee. Then, because you acted before you knew the outcome. That's rare. Elena leaned forward. You could have picked a dozen people more qualified, more corporate, less loud. You weren't loud, he said. You were present, and that scares the right people. She smiled, briefly, then grew serious. I don't know if I'm ready to leave what I built back there. That lounge is shifting. They're listening now. That matters. Marcus nodded. It does. and someone has to stay behind and hold the floor. But, she said, but someone also has to redesign the architecture. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. Inside, a draft charter for the next phase of entry without permission. Expansion to 5 new industries, pilot schools, hiring pipelines, rewriting the language used in onboarding documents, all tied not to compliance but culture. Elena stared at the papers. This isn't a job offer, she said softly. No, Marcus replied. It's a blueprint. For what? For removing the phrase didn't qualify from the mouths of people who never learned how to see potential in the first place. She closed the folder gently, took a long breath. What happens if I say no? Marcus shrugged. Then I know one more person inside the system who still remembers what the outside feels like. They sat in silence for a moment. The city murmured beyond the window. Finally, Elena said, "You're not building a company. You're building a vocabulary." Marcus met her eyes. Because language is where permission begins. She nodded. Not yes, not yet, but not no either. Just remembered. Some revolutions don't ask for fire or fists. Some begin with a meeting and a quiet cafe. Between the people who stopped waiting for permission and started writing new blueprints instead. The casino looked the same. But it wasn't. Elena stepped through the front entrance with no badge, no clipboard, no agenda. Not because she'd been demoted, because she was no longer staying. The new director of guest equity, a former pit supervisor named Daryl Langston, greeted her with a warm nod. Young, sharp, black, and already rethinking the layout of the VIP floor plan based on flow, not fences. Thank you for everything, he said. Elena smiled. Just keep the door open wider than you found it. Downstairs, Jaden stood nervously in front of the old host desk. In his hands, a slim folder with the gold seal of Cole Ventures. He'd been selected. Entry without permission. The first cohort. He didn't know who nominated him. Until now. Elena approached, handed him a small envelope. Inside, just one sentence. Someone always notices. MEC. His hand shook. Not from fear. From recognition. The kind that says, you're not invisible anymore. In a quiet hallway behind the lounge, Marcus stood alone for the first time in weeks. Not in a suit, not as a CEO, just as a son. In his hands, a folded note, edges worn from years of being opened and refolded. Rosalind Cole had written it on hotel stationery the day before her final shift. Marcus had been 17. He opened it again now. The ink was faded, but the words still knew their way into him. If the world calls you out of place, don't answer. If they ask you to wait, ask them what for. If they offer you silence, answer with your eyes. And if they ever pretend not to see you, walk in anyway, because I've seen who you are. And that boy deserves to enter any room. Without permission, he folded it back carefully, slipped it into his wallet, then turned toward the glass watching the people move through the casino. No longer walking around ropes but through open lanes. Some in suits, some in sneakers, all seen. That night, Elena stood at her apartment window, staring at the Chicago skyline. Her phone buzzed. A notification. Your Cole Ventures ID has been activated. She tapped it open. New title. Architect entry without permission. Cross-sector initiatives. A simple line underneath. No keys required. Just memory and courage. Sometimes justice doesn't wear robes or armor. Sometimes it wears a name tag that finally says, I see you. He watched the clip again, not because he hadn't seen it, but because he needed to. The video had gone viral weeks ago. Marcus Elijah Cole. Casino, lounge, silence, shift. But this time, the man watching it wasn't on a smartphone in a cafe or a laptop in a boardroom. He was on a break in the back stairwell of a high-rise hotel, one floor above the maintenance wing. Gray uniform, name tag smudged, shoes to sizes too big. His name was Malik. He'd watch the clip every night after work. Watch Marcus stand there, say nothing, let the silence crack the room instead of his voice. Watched Elena speak up. Watch the velvet ropes come down. And for the first time, Malik wondered what it would feel like to walk into a room. Before they decided who he was, his phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor. "Need you on 43. Elevator gets stuck." He stood up, slipped the phone back in his pocket, but not before glancing once more at the last frame of the video, Marcus adjusting his cuff. Walking away. No badge, no bodyguards, no raised voice, just ownership. Malik didn't want to be famous. He didn't need a viral clip. He just needed to know he could take one step forward and not be stopped by permission. An hour later, after finishing his shift, Malik didn't take the back stairs. He walked through the lobby, straight through the automatic doors, past the velvet rope near the conference hall where tonight's private gala was starting. The guard looked up, opened his mouth, then stopped. No badge, no invite. But Malik didn't pause. He didn't rush. He just walked, and something about the calm in his pace made the air bend around him. The guard lowered his hand, let him pass. Inside, the lights were soft. Tables gleamed. Suits sparkled. But Malik wasn't here to belong. He was here to remember that sometimes you don't need to fit the room. You just need to face it. Across the hall, a banner hung above the stage. Entry without permission, private round table, urban development and equity. And under it, a nameplate, reserved. Guest speaker, M. Elijah Cole. Malik exhaled, then found a seat in the back. Didn't speak, didn't stand. He just stayed. And for the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was somewhere he didn't deserve to be. Justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes, it just walks in and makes space for someone behind it.